What I came here today to do is talk to you about the 357 Developing Mobile Apps Certification Exam. This exam is part of the new MCSD App Builder track, so you pass this, and then we have an exam prep later today for the C# exam. You pass those two, and you get an MCSA and a developer track. One more exam, you have an elective, and you have your terminal or Microsoft Certified Solutions Developer or MCSD certification. Now, there's a lot to cover today, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the whole ins and outs exams, but I do want to give you a brief overview. So first off, why are we here this morning? Why did we get up? Well, we got up to talk about this certification exam, and I'm here to really give you some guidance. I always call this the checklist. So if you have a laptop, if you have a notebook, if I say anything in the next hour that you haven't heard before, write it down, because that's something you now have your study list. So this is really, we usually teach this in about a week, right? So an hour is not nearly enough time to teach this. So the goal is not really here to teach. It's more so we're here to give you a punch list of things to look out for. And anything you don't recognize, that's how you know, oh, maybe I'm not strong in this area. Maybe I haven't touched this technology before. Or I never heard of that class before. You start to build that list of things you need to study. Just a quick reminder before I move on with the slides. While you're here at Ignite, we have the study hall, about 2 rooms to the left. That while inside the study hall, practice tests are free all week. So many times people will leave the room and just go take a practice test. They're free. Today's the last day. They're free till 1:45, I believe. So I'm going to give you 3 things. I'm going to give you some strategies. I'm going to give you some ideas. And I'm going to give you some resources. Strategies, we're going to really talk about certification exam at the top. Ideas, I'm really going to just run through each objective domain and pick out some of the most important things and call them out for you. And resources at the end, I'll give you links to websites and everything like that. The slide decks, I just talked to presentation support team. They expect the slide decks to be in Monday or Tuesday. So when you get home and you go back into the My Ignite app or the My Ignite website and you go look at this session, you'll actually see the slide deck. This is actually really useful because as we go through the remainder of these slides, I have a ton of hyperlinks. This deck used to be like a Microsoft internal deck. So it's filled with nothing but MSDN links. So like for every topic, there's 5 or 6 links. And Brian Swiger, really smart guy, built this deck. And so usually when we do tech events, we say, oh, we'll just take the links out and talk about it. I figure let's just leave the links in to give you something to explore. So if I mention, let's say, relative layout. If I mention relative layout and you've never touched it before, that panel, well, there's 4 links to MSDN documentation on it, or docs.microsoft.com. All right, let's go over some really basic exam concepts. At the simplest thing, you get typically 40, 60 questions in the certification exam. You have anywhere from 1 to 4 hours, most common being about 2 hours. Specifically for this exam, it's about the 2-hour mark. When you're taking questions, if there's a question that you're just not sure of, I don't know anybody else who used to do this in high school or so, but you used to have a question, you kind of put a mark by it and come back to it later because you're hoping another question gives you a clue to it. If you had a question like that, you could always flag them and come back to them later. At the end of the exam, it'll tell you which questions you have left unanswered. So don't ever feel like, oh, I have to answer it right in this moment. You can always go back, review questions later. As long as you're within the time limit, you're perfectly fine. You can also flag questions and send it if you think a question is incorrect. You can flag it for the team to review. And many times if the question is incorrect and the team finds that, yeah, you're right, the question is incorrect, they'll give you points for it. I've been rescored on a question before, and actually I had a certification exam where I got rescored and it pushed me right above the pass. So I passed on the rescore. We have case studies in our certification exams. When we do a case studies, we actually put together a business scenario. So we tell you a story about a company, about a product, usually a solution they're trying to build, and then in the context of that scenario, we ask you a couple of questions. So case studies, they're pretty interesting. One caveat with case studies, you can't jump between them. So once you're inside of a case study, you have to finish the case study before you move on. You'll see more and more case studies in more certification exams. They tend to be more realistic validation of that you actually know your stuff, more so than just actually random multiple choice questions. Putting you in a business context, pick the right solution, pick the right tech, based upon these business requirements we gave to you earlier. If you're ever unsure with a case study, all of these sound right, then go reread the case study scenario again because you probably missed some business requirement. Passing score. 700 is a passing score. 700 is not 70%. We don't have a max score of 1,000. 700 is 70% of that. That's not how it works at all. Everything is actually dynamically scaled as far as the questions, how many points they're worth, everything like that. And when I say dynamically, I mean the team goes back, they reweight the exam, they go look at how important each question is, the amount of points they go towards them. And 700 is what they feel is somebody who is competent enough to pass this exam. So 700 means different things depending on the exam. So don't think if I get 70% of questions right, I get a 700. That's not it at all. And oh, one more thing. Answer every question. Even if you're not 100% sure, you're 15 minutes left before you run out of time, which just happened to me before. An answer is better than no answer. You think, oh, why would you have to say that? But it's happened before. You have cut scores for each exam. So essentially, when they create the exam, they evaluate the questions, apply a score to the questions, try to determine how difficult they are, and they have a certain cut score. If you get above this mark, you're going to pass. That's the cut score right there. Each question is worth 1 point, so some of them may be worth multiple points. The problem here is I'm going to jump on this again. Just do the questions if you're not 100% sure. Something is better than nothing. You're not going to get any points taken away for wrong answers. You only gain points for right answers. You don't get negative points for wrong answers. And then market items for reviews. All right, I'm done with the strategies around certification exams. I want to really get to meat this because this is a ton of stuff in the certification exam. So you're going to see questions when you go into the certification exams, and they actually have a very well-defined structure. So we start off with a scenario. Every question, even the questions not part of case studies, have a scenario. The scenario could be one sentence, but the scenario is there just to set context. Then we have the problem statement. And the problem statement usually has some verb in there, usually has some terminology in there that makes it, this is what you're trying to accomplish. Sometimes the scenario will have some details in it before you get to the problem statement that kind of scopes your answer. So there may be 2 or 3 answers that will fit that problem statement, but won't necessarily fit that scenario. Then you have your goal statement, and your goal statement is really the question, really, and that's where we're at. And then, well, actually, I'm sorry. The goal statement is what you're trying to do. The question statement is the question. I really want to get to the technical stuff. So moving past this, anybody here was here for Cert 101 over last weekend? So one of our great guys, he actually goes much deeper into this. I just did like a couple slides about certification exams and stuff. He had a whole session on it. So if you're really interested about the structure of certification exams, the details of that, David Afasi gave a great session on that last weekend. So this exam have multiple areas covering, actually 7 in total. They're broken down to really small portions, with the biggest portions being around the 25% mark. So there's really 7 domains that you can see questions from. On the first domain being about adaptive UIs. And the difference between responsive and adaptive UIs. Anybody here know the difference between a responsive adaptive UI? Or ever heard that terminology before? Okay, so think of a responsive website like a Bootstrap website. And a responsive XAML UI is a UI that flows. So maybe you're shrinking it and elements are rearranged. But adaptive UI has hard cuts. So if you're on mobile view, hide this element. If you're in desktop view, show that element. So there's adaptive UI has hard cuts and change things. Responsive UI reflows things. We're going to come back to that. So really that concept, understanding those differences and the controls you use in XAML to implement that, that's the first objective domain. Now the domain. The next one is page navigation, page lifecycle events, application lifecycle events. We're talking about like, resuming, excuse me, resuming, implementing code for app initialization, wherever you click the app to start it up, wherever you get a hyperlink and you have metadata coming in, maybe a query string parameter, that type of stuff. The next one, data access, data binding. That includes both data access for Entity Framework Core and data binding. So the good old binding tags, whether it's regular binding or XBind. Adaptive coding and feature detection. So identifying whether something works on a phone, wherever you have access to that feature, and then using it. So there's this whole life cycle around that. Anybody here ever develop iOS and Android app? All right, we got a couple people. So you already know there's a whole workflow around, all right, is this feature supported on this device? Did this person give me permissions to use this feature? Okay, attempt to use this feature. This is understanding those kind of 3 steps there. User input, user interactions. So we're talking about user interface, inking, touching, tapping, things like that. authentication, identity management. And then the last one is the most fun one, but it's always like 15–20%, so it's not a lot. But like notifications, background tasks, some of the other more tile updates, things that notify the user asynchronously. So I'm going to go into the first domain, and I want to go jump immediately into the meat of this. So we want to first talk about constructing a page layout, and so you're going to that includes quite a few different topics. Like I'm a big fan of grids, and second place is stack panel because I came from the Silverlight days. But the relative panel came around for a long time. I really didn't understand how it worked. So I could just do this with a grid. So understanding the relative panel and how things work and how things can be reflowed, selecting the appropriate layout. So the relative panel is one I always call out because a lot of people came for XAML, for Silverlight WPF like me. And so you just do everything in grid and stack panel because that's what you know. But the relative panel is usually the one that most people are newer to. So understanding that layout really well is going to help you out here. But then also understanding that there are other layouts available. So if you started off with UWP for mobile or tablet applications and you haven't used a lot of the other layouts like the grid, the border, border's technically layout control, but I don't feel like it. The stack panel, understanding when to choose which one and what makes sense. Speaking of grid, understanding how to create those rows and columns and grids. It seems it's one of those things, once you've done it, it's pretty simple. If you haven't done it before, definitely study it because it's hard to memorize if you haven't done it before. But once you've done it, it just comes like that. Grid is just one of those things. And then understanding alignment, margins, and padding. So we're talking about both the element alignment, so horizontal, vertical alignment of the element, content alignment, and then margin and padding. I always use the analogy here. If you're familiar with margin and padding from web development, it's very similar. So understanding margin padding, when you choose one over the other, when it makes sense, how does that affect the content alignment? How does that affect the element alignment? And so that's really the big thing you want to understand with a page layout. Lots of resources. Like I said, we're going to have lots of hyperlinks, so when you download these slides next week, go ahead, click through them. Anything I mentioned that you're not familiar with, like I didn't really talk about the hub class too much. Understanding that hub layout and how to use that, you can click through these links and go to that. Now, responsive adaptive, I kind of went into this already. Shame on me, I should have saved it for this slide. But really understanding when to choose one over the other, and more importantly, when to use both together. So when you got adaptive layout may say, hey, I have a sidebar. If I'm in tablet or larger layout, show the sidebar. If I'm on mobile layout or smaller, hide the sidebar. So I'm making hard cuts and adding, removing, rearranging, changing elements based upon what I call hard sizes or hard cuts, right? You're using something like Visual State Manager to do so. Whereas in a responsive layout, you might hear the fluid layout. Responsive layout is the opposite, where it's saying, okay, rearrange the elements based on logic. Rearrange the elements based on how much space is available. And if it happens to hide or show something, or rearrange an element, or maybe makes things columns instead of rows instead of columns because of the size of the screen, that's just kind of the effect of the fluid layout. I'm not making hard cuts. I'm not making hard decisions based on layout. So understand when to choose one over the other and combining them together. Now, there's an adaptive trigger, and there's a documentation link for that. But, just want to really zoom in on this and kind of nail down. If you're used to Visual State Manager, anybody here never worked with Visual State Manager before? Okay, so Visual State Manager has a bit of a learning curve. But really, we're defining these states, and based upon these states, we can change properties of elements, we can trigger actions, we can do different things. So let's use this in the context of adaptive layout, right? So we can use a Visual State Manager, say, if it's a small screen or if it's a big screen, that I need to hide or show elements based upon that. Here, we're actually, this example, we're using the content, narrow versus wide, but I can make things hide, I can make things show, I can apply different styles, I can do different things. This is my hard adaptive layout. Now, the relative layout, I wouldn't use something like a Visual State Manager. I just use something that actually reflows content. So you think about, a lot of people come from web development, so I try to come up with many web development parallels as possible. So if you're thinking about web development, you're thinking about like a CSS, Flex Grid, things like that, we can wrap around. elements, that's really what the relative layout. Adaptive layout is more like CSS media queries. If height is greater than this, that's actually, all right, so the two people who never used Visual State Manager before, have you used CSS media queries before? Okay, so half-half. No worries. It's just like media queries in CSS and HTML where you can set like minimum width, maximum width, and apply certain styles based upon those widths. Visual State Manager is the equivalent for XAML. So in the XAML world, this allows you to set parameters, triggers, and say, if these things are true, apply these styles, apply these properties. So it's really useful. A really good example is you look at apps, and sometimes they put the hamburger button up, and you can slide it from the left. You've probably seen from the Ignite app, you slide it from the left and use the menu. That may make sense on a mobile layout. But on a desktop layout, I might want to just keep the navigation menu pinned to the left. I don't want to slide in or out. That's really confusing on a desktop machine. So I use something like a Visual State Manager to configure the properties of the button. Maybe I have the menu always, static out when I'm doing desktop, and then mobile, it can hide and show and trigger off that button. All right, within adaptive UI, now creating controls. Understanding the difference between a custom control in XAML, a user control. At this point, I'm not even doing user controls anymore. It's just such a legacy thing from WPF days. But understand how to create a custom control, how to define your generic.xaml, how to implement your default styles. You probably heard this term before when hearing people talk about XAML, lookless controls. So the whole idea is when you create a control in any kind of XAML-based UI language, so you think about WPF, you're thinking about mobile UWP, they don't have an appearance by default. And so you have to define a default appearance when you ship this control. That way, when people use it, it shows up, it's pretty easy to use. And then people can override that default appearance. So if you're not really familiar with custom controls, you're not familiar with the concept of lookless controls, and that's something new to you, my highest recommendation to you is actually to go into Visual Studio, open a UWP project, right-click the button, and go to Edit Template or Copy Template. And what it's going to do is it's going to spit out that default template for the button. The same thing that you would, if you would create your own control, put in generic.xaml, it'll spit that out for you. And it is long, but it kind of gives you a really good summary of the type of things you think about when building a custom control. Like, for example, we talked about Visual State Manager in the last slide. You wait till you see the Visual State Manager for a button. There's like 12 different button states. Like if you're hovering, you're clicking, but you click down, but you're not hover. If you click down using the keyboard combination, it's crazy. But the thing is, it helps you understand why you would use a Visual State Manager, how you can define your own custom states when you use normal built-in states, how you can change the appearance of it. And you find out the button is actually really not that crazy. It's really just a border and a content presenter. And all this clicking, and you know how the button kind of goes concave and it shows back up, all of that is just done by changing the way the border looks. It's just changing the style of the border. That's how it simulates the click and everything like that. So that's a good place to start if you both don't know custom controls and don't know Visual State Manager. I highly recommend picking apart the existing template for a button in XAML. That'll do it for you. Lots of resources around this. So once you've done that and you start to see some crazy stuff like what is a theme resource versus what is a static resource versus what is a some of these other elements I see, we got lots of links here, and that's what these are really here for. Now, optimizing the page layout. This is getting less and less important, but we still do certification. We still talk about an injected domain. Back in the day when XAML first came along, if you nested enough stuff together, you could actually have some real tough performance dips. So for example, we used to tell everybody, don't nest stack panels. Now, the engine is a whole lot better now. It's going to deal with it better. But the reality is if you nest a lot of layout controls, these layout controls, especially stuff like stack panels, relative layouts, they dynamically compute where elements go based upon their parents and their child elements. And so the way to think about it is stack panel is a perfect example. Stack panel layouts, things vertical, horizontal, is dynamically figuring out where they go based upon the parent and child controls. If you put a stack panel within a stack panel within a stack panel, all of them are waiting for something else to tell it where to go. So all of a sudden, you've created a huge performance overhead just because maybe you could have implemented something that could have been done with a grid. So understanding that nesting a lot of layout controls together has a performance impact and then choosing the right layout control. So maybe instead of having 3 nested stack panels, as a XAML consultant, number one reason I see this is because people want to implement rows and columns. Say, well, we have a great control for rows and columns, grids. Oh, we implement the grid, everything's hard-coded in. With the grid, there's not as much computation that needs to happen in the engine to make that layout happen, because the grid says 50% here, 500 pixel wide here, we're good to go. That's less computational overhead. So understanding that, we have some links to optimizing your XAML layout, optimizing your XAML markup. That's what we're talking about here. And you see, we use an example here. We have a stack panel within a border. Probably not going to be the end of the world to do this. But when we talk about optimizing a layout, we may be talking about just, hey, look, if the stack panel has some border properties, do we really need to create another control just to modify that? So reducing the amount of layout elements every chance you get is really what we're talking about here. So a lot of stuff on layout. I think I almost spent 15 minutes on layout, so I'm going to be a little bit more efficient the rest of them. But layout is usually where a lot of people get stuck. It's just one of those things, if you know, you know. If you don't know, again, after this session, when you get back to your homes, places of business next week, I highly recommend you look at some of those links we have there. So the next big domain is really around page navigation and lifecycle events. So basically, you could put together a navigation frame and then use the frame.navigate method to perform navigation, where you have a parent element and then you have pages being navigated within that parent element. And you understand within that parent element that it's essentially a pattern. You have buttons available to go back and forth. When you navigate between pages, you can pass in parameters. So let's say I'm at what I like to call the main page, where we have a list of all our products. And you click on the product, and I want to send you to the product page. When we get to the product page, how does the product page know what product I want to load? Well, I need to pass in maybe the ID of the product, or maybe something identifying about the product as a parameter in that navigation action. And this could be done manually. We'll talk a little bit more about a more complex way to do this towards the end of this domain. But understanding that's really your navigation pattern. They call it the master details pattern. So understanding that. Back button behavior. Out of the box, it'll just send you to the last page. But there are scenarios where you don't want people to go to the last page. People say, oh, which examples are you talking about? The biggest example I can give is a wizard. So let's say you have within your a form, and people need to go through between 4 or 5 different pages to sign up. You don't want people to go back to a specific page. So if they hit the back button, maybe you want to send them completely to the beginning of the form. Give them a warning. Say, hey, if you hit the back button, you're going to start the form over again. Maybe in your application logic, you don't really have the logic in there to handle people like restarting a certain portion of the form. So that may be a scenario where you want to override the behavior for the back button. Accessibility requirements, a lot of this stuff is implemented out of the box, but understanding that it's there, not overriding it, understanding how to add your own logic there. So things like if I'm using keys and I want to use the keyboard shortcut to go back and forth page like I'm using a browser, I understand that I should be able to do this right within navigation frame. Narrator, so people may be using narrator tool in Windows and need to know like what page they're going between and what the buttons do. So supporting that and UI automation. So if you have a test team, they need to automate UI testing. Supporting UI automation by making sure elements have unique tags within them, or unique attributes is the term I'm looking for. Unique attributes in them, so the UI automation tool knows, oh, instead of trying to find a certain pixel space on the screen and click, the UI automation tool just says, click this element with this unique ID. Lots of resources here. All right, app activation. This throws everybody off, so I'm going to spend a second on here. It is not merely enough to understand how to put code in startup. So I think a lot of people go and create a Visual Studio project, and they see the whole startup, and they're like, oh, I can inject code in startup. Great, I know how to do app activation. But the certification and objectives actually call out a lot more than just startup. So for example, if I want to share a link, let's use that example I gave earlier when we had a products list. You can click an item on products list to go to products page, right? What if I wanted to give somebody a hyperlink? And if they click this hyperlink, whether it's an email, wherever it may be, it opens my app and takes them directly to that product page. They don't have to click around. So understanding how applications are activated by those hyperlinks, what is it called here? I always forget the terminology they use. Deep link. There we go. I was going to use something completely different. So deep linking, that's what it's called here. Deep linking, where people click a hyperlink, it opens your application, but now your application is not just normally open, it's open with parameters. So parsing those parameters, understanding why your application is open, and sending the user to the correct experience. Another really good example of that is we talked about maybe having a wizard together, a form to fill out stuff. Maybe I want to send somebody not to the home page of my application, but I want to send them to start the form. So a really good example of this is an application I built for incident management. And this incident management system, you can open a ticket with the tech support team, yada, 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 everybody's happy. But a lot of times, people are weird creatures. So they'll just email the tech support team because they think they're going to get them to the front of the line. And so what we did was we actually added a feature into the app where the tech support team can send you a hyperlink with a parameter, with a title parameter, right? When you click that hyperlink, it opens the incident management system, pre-fills out the title for you. So whenever somebody emails, my iPhone is broken, the tech support team sends them a hyperlink with my iPhone is broken is the title. It's like, please fill out this application for us and we'll get to you as quickly as we can. They click that link, it opens up the Universal Windows app. Remember, act activation is not a normal act activation because we have the parameter saying to open up the new incident form and pre-fill this title. So everybody feels good. Tech support team gets to kind of be, everybody likes to be a little bit of a jerk, so we get to kind of be a little bit of a jerk, but also we get to follow rules. We get to open up the activation app and kind of pre-fill out a form for people. So it's pretty cool, pretty neat way to do it. So understanding that, and also secondary tiles. Not a lot of people implement secondary tiles. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but if you're implementing secondary tiles, people can activate your app from a secondary tile. So understanding if they activate your app from a secondary tile, identifying that, and then implementing any custom logic you want to implement for that. App suspension and resuming. This was the term I was looking for earlier, and I completely lost. I forget what it's, I always forget it's called suspension. I thought it was like shut down or something like that. So but it's not, the application is not really shutting down. What's happening is being suspended, and you have a time limit to do any type of logic you want to do. So sometimes what happens is the user switch away from your app. The idea here is that it's suspending the app. It doesn't want to spend any more Windows resources on an app that's not running. So as a good applications developer, what you want to do is make sure you persist anything. That way, when they resume the app, if you have something persistent, you can send them to the right screen and refill out information. So let's use that incident management form, that example I just used. Let's say somebody's halfway through, fill out the incident management form, and now I don't know, a new Netflix show comes out. So they switch the app, it gets suspended, and they go look at their Netflix show. If they go back, the app is resumed, and now the form is empty. So when you suspend, making sure you save the state of whatever they're working on, save wherever they are, and then implementing logic. So when it's resumed, pre-fill out that state. So maybe fill out that form again, maybe you send them to the right page. Understanding suspension and resume and how you implement that. So it's not just, be able to create an event handler for suspend and resume, but understand strategically why you would use that. You see here it says optimize, suspend, resume. If you click that link, it actually sends you to the time. So you actually have a time limit. So a really good example I like to give people, I saw a developer use Entity Framework to create a massive SQL query that takes forever to run. And so when somebody tries to suspend, it would time out sometimes because the SQL query hasn't returned yet from them trying to save the form. And when I say it was very inefficient. And then they hit the time limits. And it's crazy because I do a lot of database stuff, but you don't believe until you see it that a SQL query that takes like 10 seconds to run. All right, suspend, resume. So I'm gonna zoom in on this for a second. So essentially you can add a handler in your app class for if you're resuming the application. So this doesn't mean you're starting the application. This means that application was in the background, the user switched away from it, no longer has resources from Windows, and then they resume it, so they come back to the app. So resume is different than startup, understanding that. Suspension is very similar. You know, the user is not really shutting down the machine, closing the app necessarily. This could just be the user switching away, and Windows is trying to be smart about how it manages resources, is no longer giving resources to this application. The best way to test out suspend and resume is you can open up Visual Studio. and you can actually simulate a suspension resume within Visual Studio. There's buttons at the top near the debug buttons that allow you to simulate suspension resume. That's a great way to test it out and see what happens. But even if you do normal debugging within Visual Studio, you will actually see suspension resume happen, because a really good example I'll give is, let's say you have code still running and debugger's running and you close the application. You drag it down however you like to close it. You'll see that the debugger keeps running for some time because it's giving the opportunity to suspend a safe state before it actually shuts down. So technically the application is still running. It's running, remember I told you about that time limit? It's running within that time limit to give you opportunity to save state. Data access, data binding. I can spend a ton of time on this, but Entity Framework Core, that's pretty much what this is. Entity Framework Core, accessing data using Entity Framework Core, creating your models, your plain old CLR objects or POCOs, using SQLite as the store for Entity Framework Core. One of the great things about UWP is you can use SQLite. Entity Framework's flexible enough that it can use regular SQL as its backend or provider, or it can use SQLite as its provider. It actually can use a lot of different databases. So since SQLite supported within Universal Windows, you can just use the Entity Framework Core and point it to SQLite. So a lot of the stuff you do with regular Entity Framework is going to just work here out of the box. So that's the data access mechanism that you're going to see in the certification exam. Binding is the one I really want to talk about, though. I come from like hardcore WPF Silverlight XAML land. So the binding tags, I grew up with that tag. We go back. But the XBind tag threw me through a loop for a long time because, well, binding's perfect as it is. Why do we need another binding tag? So there are two different tags, and I really want to zoom in on this. And you can see here that the syntax is slightly different for the tags. So it is not enough to know the syntax for one tag. You should know the syntax for both. And it's really interesting because it changes the way you look at things. Well, with the XBind tag, you're binding to the view model and using that view model properties. Whereas if you're using the traditional binding tag, like I've used forever, you're used to data context, and the hierarchy of data context is flowing down through elements unless you change what the data context is. So understanding that there's a difference between them, what I find in practice is a lot of people who are new to Universal Windows Platform and started here, XAML here, will be using XBind tags. So you have to go back and figure out what a data context is, how do the regular binding tags work. And a lot of people who've been working with XAML since like really early days use the binding tags, have no idea how to work the XBind tags. So I'm going back a slide. I put a ton of links in here. Some of these links I've added. So pick which one you know and study the other one, right? Always go in and figure out, okay, which one's interested in me, which one needs to know. Go ahead. I'm trying to think of a feature difference. I think there are some template bindings you can do with XBind, and I can't recall off the top of my head because I used them once or twice. I've used XBind once or twice. That you can do within the template in XBind that you can't do with binding. XBind is also a markup extension, so you can actually extend it further and add behavior to it, where binding is just built into the framework. Those are the two major differences that come up on the top of my head. And when I say templates, I mean, let's say you have a list view and you have your item template for items within the list view. With XBind, you don't have to do the whole, anybody here ever done like an ancestor binding? Like you go up, yeah, you don't have to do all that crazy stuff. You can just point at the view model and say, I want the view model's property. So it's a whole lot more streamlined. Let's say you're within a list view, you want to get a property of the overall view model, and maybe not a property of the current item, whole lot easier in XBind versus the traditional binding. So the product team would love you to use both. And the certification exam is definitely going to expect you to know both. Does that help? All right, MVVM, this is my favorite part. I get one slide to get excited about. So I love MVVM. I've been using Prism. I got super religious right around Angular time, and I said, Angular is really MVVM. And for a long time, Google said the same thing. Then they switched up, says MVC. No, you're not MVC, you're MVVM. And Angular 2 is definitely MVVM. MVVM is kind of the weirdest pattern that's not recognized everywhere. And it's this whole idea that we have a model class representing state, we have a view model representing application behavior, and then we have our views, which should be, I hate to use this term, but it's the only one that you see in documentation all the time. We call them dumb views. The views should have really no logic, no understanding of how the business application works, no business logic whatsoever. As a matter of fact, if you're really hardcore about MVVM, within my development team, you're not allowed to write code behind. Or the C# files that associated with XAML file, you're not allowed to use them, ever, period. So if you have to use it, that means you don't understand MVVM. Because almost everything you could do in a C# file that's associated with XAML file can be done in MVVM, can be done directly in XAML. So you say, okay, well, what if I have a button, and if you click that button and I want to show or hide another element? Create a behavior. Create a behavior, make the trigger a button click, make the action performs, change the property of another element. Okay, well, what if I want to do this, that? If you can't do it with behavior, you can do it with a command. If you can't do it with command, you can do it with a view model property. So understanding MVVM, understanding the pattern, and you see lots of really good documentation here. You don't have to understand the super hardcore MVVM framework. So like, you don't have to understand Prism, you don't have to understand MVVM Cross, those are all frameworks. We're just talking about the pattern here. You don't have to understand any of the other packages like template 10, stuff like that. We're really just talking about MVVM, the pattern. And so the links I've provided are really about the pattern more so than the implementation. So if you understand the pattern, that's gonna be more than enough. One of the great things is that C# introduced the ability to have async await keywords in there for a much lighter weight way to do asynchronous requests. But I've been doing asynchronous requests since like the good old days. Like I said, with WPF, Windows used to give you, I believe it was 2.5 seconds. And if you didn't, if your UI was locked for 2.5 seconds, do anybody know what happens if your UI locks in WPF or Windows Forms for 2.5 seconds? So let's say you go on to make a service call and it takes longer than 2.5 seconds. Do you know what Windows does? It does more than that. It does something really scary. So have you ever seen the little dialog that says this application is not working and it has a little spinning indicator and you think it's crashing? What do you do as a user? Control, delete, kill the process. So Windows is super aggressive about this in Windows 10, especially Universal Windows Platform. I think they shrunk it down to 1.5 seconds. So if your UI is unresponsive for, I always just tell people 2 to 3 seconds, it's going to tell the user it's broken. Windows is going to tell the user that it's broken. So what do you need to understand? You need to understand, one, the old way, which is you able to create event handlers, and within an event handler you do stuff. So if I need to do anything that takes more than a second, I need to do it asynchronously. And with C# we have the async await keywords. That's wonderful. It makes things code a lot cleaner, a lot easier to read. However, when you're doing something asynchronously, especially using async await keywords, you're doing it on another thread. So when you're done doing a task, let's say I'm going to Entity Framework and I'm saving some entities, right? When you're done completing that task, you have to actually bring everything back to the UI thread. We call it marshalling to the UI thread, and we have something called a dispatcher. And this dispatcher class allows you to essentially say, bring me back. So, you know, I was going to make a funny joke, but it's just bring me back to the UI thread. And so essentially, if you need to change the UI, you need to come back to the UI thread. And that's OK, because the heavy lifting of your application was done asynchronously on a background thread. Everybody's happy. As far as the users are concerned, your UI never froze up. And you can still do stuff in your UI. Like my favorite thing to do is to gray out the whole UI, make it so you can't click on anything, and show a spinner icon. That's a responsive UI. Now, if the UI just freezes when you click the button and nothing happens, that's an unresponsive UI. So a responsive UI in the background, it could take 10, 15 seconds, but the user sees the spinning indicator and the user knows that this application is not broken, something's moving. That means it's what does users say? It's thinking, right? The application is thinking. So we want the application to think, and we're ready to go back in, maybe show a dialog, change the text in a button, change the text in a text box or a label. We bring that back to the UI thread using the dispatcher. App-to-app communications. So applications can talk to each other using the shared contract. It's something that is one of those things I say has a bit of a learning curve. If you've never done it before, definitely review all these links. But essentially, you can implement the share contract or implement a share contract, and essentially your application can share things out to other applications, or you can receive things shared from other applications. So really good example. There's the camera app in Windows 10. You can take a picture. Where can you share the picture? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, to a lesser extent, LinkedIn. So the idea here is that the camera's implementing a share contract, is sharing the photo out, and these are shared targets. So this is, they talk about some specific examples, but if you can work through that simple share example, the other ones come a lot faster. So be able to implement a simple app that shares something to other apps, that's the example I would say. If you've never seen a share contract before, implement that example. Once you get through that, everything else comes easier. So drag and drop, launching the app store from within your app, opening another app and showing results. These are, like, let's say you have multiple business applications and you want to open a different app and show results, implementing those contracts. That's really what this is all about. REST web services. I wish you could say this was complicated, but know how to use HTTP client. If you haven't used HTTP client, go ahead and download on NuGet, download that package, try it out. It's a pretty simple package. We have documentation here, but essentially HTTP client is how you make requests to REST services. So if you want to get, put, post, delete, patches implemented, a lot of other things. You can set up request headers. You can do it asynchronously. You can receive a response, look at the status code of response. There's an enum available, so you can compare the response against expected responses. Understanding those response status codes, things like that, being a good API citizen. That's what this HTTP client is mostly about. And then file system access, which I'm going to zoom in on a little bit. But file system access, be able to get to a file within the file system. And that's really using things like storage folder and storage file, to a lesser extent storage item, using file pickers. I actually did a talk yesterday where we used storage file and storage folder. We actually opened a known folder, the music folder. We created a storage file type WAV. I recorded audio on my microphone. We persisted it to that file, then used that file again, opened it as a stream, and played it using a media playback element. So they're pretty simple to learn and pick up. As a matter of fact, just clicking the storage file class link there will get you most of what you're trying to go for. But I just really want to show you an example. So a file picker really shows the user that UI dialog to open, close the file. So if the user says, okay, I want to open a file, or if your application, sorry, not the user, in your application you want the user to pick a file for you, use the file open picker. And you can set different things on it. Like you see, we have the view mode, where if you wanted to be a detailed list, you want to be large thumbnails, you set a view mode. Suggested start location, that's a really interesting one. You don't set a start location, you set a recommendation for a start location. Well, what do I mean by that? So let's say I want people to open pictures. You see I set the filter type to only show ping files. I set view mode to thumbnail. So I want the user to open a picture from my app. Now I say the suggested start location is your pictures library. That's an enum right there. Now, when the user first launches the application, it's going to start in the pictures library. But one of the great things about applications is consistent behavior, right? Let's say the user goes out of the pictures library and they open a picture from the downloads folder. When they open this file open picker again, even though my suggested start location is the pictures library, it's just going to go back to the last location the user used. That's why it's called suggested and not just, or suggested start location instead of just start location. The suggested start location is if a location is not set, which one to use. And then you see here, picker is an asynchronous call for pick single file async. There's a multiple file version. And then you just await that asynchronous call, and you get the result of the picker as a storage file. You can pick multiple files, and it's just a collection or enumerable type of storage file. So you get for each, whatever you prefer to do here. You see here we just use the count, so you're able to determine if there's any item in this collection, then we're going to for each over it and get the file names. So pretty simple example. All right, feature detection. This one's a little bit smaller part, so we're not going to spend too much time in it. But we talked about this a little bit before, where you can detect features for an application. So if a feature is present, if you can use a feature, be able to determine whether that's available for you use in the application. This gets really interesting when you want to talk about capabilities, whether you want to use a microphone, whether you want to use webcam, location. Location is the one I run into the most. Let's say at my application, once you can upload a photo, I'm making the next social network. You want to upload a photo, and I want to put where you uploaded the photo. Not all devices will have a GPS in it, especially when we're talking about laptops. So I have to first check to see if geolocation or location is available before I call any geolocation APIs. So that's what this feature detection is all about. Maybe less so nowadays, but there was a day where you had to check to see if a laptop had a webcam or check to see if a laptop has a microphone. If you're a good app developer, you're going to check regardless, because who knows, somebody could be using a $100 laptop that got off the back of a truck, and it might not have a webcam or microphone. And if your codes are looking for a webcam and microphone, it's just going to crash, right? So feature detection is really what you want to look for here. Be able to look to see, okay, does it have this feature before you call the feature? User input. A lot of people are really great at text boxes, labels, and buttons. But there are so many features available that look just like the Windows app. So we're talking about command bars, flyouts, dialogues. These are UI controls that look exactly like the controls you see in other Windows apps. So if you want your app to look like it's native, it's part of the operating system, then at this point you're implementing some of these special controls. So a command bar maybe is the bar you'll see at the top or the bottom with buttons along it. We use app bar buttons along that command bar. So if you want to implement your own command bar, that's definitely one way to do it. Flyouts are those dialogues you see come from the left to the right. So maybe you click on something and that flyout comes from the right with some properties about that item, or maybe something you could change, maybe a form. And then you're probably pretty well aware of what a dialogue is. Dialogues pop up like a message box, and then they allow you to either okay, cancel, maybe input some content. Dialogues along that line of work. The other one is not in the title that I did want to bring up too is tooltips. All these things are built into the system, so there's no reason for you to write your own tooltip logic. No reason for you to write your own dialogue logic. There's no reason for you to create controls for things that are already built in. So understanding these built-in controls that are made to make your application look like a native Windows application, understand how to use those controls. Now, input. Now, touch input, mouse input, it can seem like they're the same thing. In many cases, they can be the same thing. So if the user clicks on their screen and they tap a button, or they click the button with their mouse, as far as the button click handler, it's going to be the same handler. But if you want to separate out touch and mouse clicks, maybe you have a scenario where you want touch to do something different than a mouse click, you can do that. There's touch events available. Understanding how to implement those touch events, how to handle touch press. This is, I'm going back to like some scary days in WPF land where we had to implement this all manually. You don't have to go that far. It's a whole lot easier now to implement touch input. But then it starts to get interesting because you can implement other types of input. So virtual keyboard, I don't know if I have a slide on this. Actually, I'm going to jump to a slide and I'm going to come back. Inking, things like that. There's alternative forms of input. Implementing those alternative forms of input, you can write special logic for it, or you can use controls. Like, anybody here ever use the ink control? Excuse me, let me drink some water. The ink control allows you to create a surface where people can draw. You can actually export the drawing as an image file. So maybe I want to export whatever the user drew as a PNG file. So that gets interesting. Oh yeah, somebody could draw a map. Yay, it's a VTech laptop from like 1990. What it gets really interesting is I can actually implement notation on my app. So maybe I have an app that shows a lot of text data, and I want people to take notes on top of it, right? So the user takes notes on top of my text data. Then I export those notes, whatever file format I want, and it's an overlay. So next time I show that text data, I'll overlay it with the PNG. As long as the layout is the same, the user will see that. There's more elegant ways to do that. You see that with some other note-taking applications that kind of dynamically figures out where everything lays out. But that's where inking becomes interesting. Camera input, location services, GPS input, speech recognition, speech synthesis, Cortana integration, launching the personal assistant or the Cortana assistant at the bottom left corner of your machine. all of these are APIs you can tap into. So my recommendation, any of these you haven't tried yet, try them, because they're listed in objectives for the exam. So that means you should expect to see a question or so about them. None of these are terribly difficult. I mean, there's lots of links here because there's lots of different ways to do this. But it's not that it's difficult. It's just in a common use case, you may use, if there's 20 features, you may use 5 out of 20 features. So you kind of want to expand your horizon here and try out some of these other features. I was going back and forth between the slides there, so sorry about that. It was out of order. I want to talk about geolocator real quick, because geolocator is interesting. There's 2 use cases for geolocator. You can either get my location right now, or subscribe to notification location updates. So first, before you call the geolocator, we talked about this pattern before, you want to make sure you have permission to locate items. So you're requesting access. And that's the user is going to see the dialog, hey, this person wants to use your GPS. Are you okay with that? Yes or no? Now, once the user is giving you the okay and everything's happy, then you can use it in 2 different ways. The get position async literally says, get my position where I'm at right now. Now, the more interesting one is, what if you want to track their location? So you can actually create a geolocator and set up an interval. And then we're talking milliseconds here, right? So this is a 2-second interval. And the idea here is that you can subscribe to if the status changes or the position changes. And then use event handlers, use methods to actually go in. Let's see if I do have an example. So whenever your position changes, notify the user. So here we're notifying the user. Maybe I'll just update some text elements. Maybe I have a map. I'll update where the pin is on the map. You notice from earlier today, we were talking about the dispatcher. I'm changing UI elements. So I got to marshal that back to the UI thread, because the GPS, the geolocation, is running in the background asynchronously. That way the geolocation doesn't actually lock up my application and freeze things up. It's all running on background threads. Authentication, identity management. This puts me to sleep, but such is off, right? OAuth. Azure Active Directory is an identity provider. It's not Active Directory in the cloud. So this is the example we use, but Azure Active Directory supports lots of different authentication protocols. Specifically, OAuth is one of the authentication protocols. So understanding how to use Azure Active Directory and using the OAuth protocol to implement corporate authentication for your application, that's what you're going to want to focus on here. But there's another one that's really interesting, that's Credential Locker. It's something that if you've never had to set up Credential Locker before, then you're probably going to want to do this before you think about taking the certification exam, because it's listed in the certification objectives. So it's definitely something, you know, they might test you out. And so the big thing with the Credential Locker is that you configure it, you set it up, and then essentially you're saving credentials to this locker and then retrieving them later. Now I'll skip through this slide. I want to show you an example. So we create a password vault, and we add a credential or password credential to this vault. So we might give it a unique name. The unique name is interesting because you may have multiple credentials saved to the vault from one single application. Username, password. Then later on, if we want to retrieve those credentials, we can do so. We use our password vault. We find by the resource name, and we pass in the username and the resource name, and we can retrieve the credentials from the vault. So persistent credentials, you have to have some string. We refer to that as the resource name, but some unique string identifying this resource, username, password. Retrieving the credentials, that same unique string identifying the resource, username, password is the return value. So that's really the credential vault for you, or credential locker. Two-factor auth. So your application can implement two-factor auth directly. Many of you hear two-factor auth, you think of, like, let's say you're logging to your organization's AAD, and you get your phone mobile notification right there, and you have to approve it, and then you're in for your company. You can implement directly within the application. So it might not be enough to authenticate using existing tools. Maybe you want people to use Windows Hello. Maybe you want them to use, what's another example I gave? Oh, Passport. Yeah, so anybody here never heard of Windows Hello before? Or, all right, better question. Who here has heard of Windows Hello? All right, we got 3 out of 6. Okay, so Windows Hello, you've probably seen the demos with the Surface Book. You can smile at the Surface Book and it logs you in. That's Windows Hello. you can implement that directly within your application. So it's not enough for you to know the password. I need to see your face too. And Windows Hello is hardware-based, and the way it works is not a camera. It's not a traditional camera like you think. It's an IR camera. It actually has more to do with a Connect than a webcam. So it's an IR camera. It actually it looks at the structure of the face. It looks at the features and stuff like that. So that it's kind of weird, but it actually works like if I grow a beard, it'll still work, which is weird because the structure of my face doesn't change. Just the appearance changes. Something that will fool a camera, but with a full IR sensor. Real world we live in. I never thought we'd be smiling at laptops to unlock them, but there you go. All right, one of my favorite ones, the last one. Everybody's made it through this long journey with me, and I really want to get excited about this one. Implementing some of the cool features of UWP that you never get to implement on simple projects, right? So we're talking about notifications, background tasks, be able to build components and use them across UWP projects. So you can create components or class libraries. A Windows runtime component will just run, within another UWP application. Class libraries, whether you implementing a regular class library or a portable class library or PCL, be able to implement those, use them. That's one of the things you want to look at. Tile and toast notifications. So you got your live tiles. Maybe you want the live tile to update. So understanding the XML necessary for that live tile to update. Understanding how to update the live tile. And there's lots of links here. There's not a lot of code really, but just I think the biggest challenge here is understanding the XML schema and syntax for updating a live tile or toast notification. Background tasks. So you can actually have a background worker doing background work in your application. So an example I like to give is, let's say we have a camera application, and I like to resize things, create thumbnails and stuff like that. Well, if I do this on the UI thread, it might take a while, especially if these are massive images. People are uploading raw images for their DSLR. And so what I like to do is create a background task. And so I can actually communicate with this background task. And I say, okay, user uploaded an image. I'm handing this, maybe the location of the image, off to the background task. The background task is doing any processing that needs to be done on the image. And I can listen to when things are done on the background task. And it doesn't affect my running application. So my running application can move on. And this is stuff we've been doing on the website for a while. So a lot of the stuff that's great about the web will really, we can implement here using the same patterns and strategies. Really, you can monitor the progress of a background task. There's a life cycle for them. You can have eventing. So if you want the background task to raise an event on your actual application, you can do so, and the vice versa. And you can actually call into a background task directly. So in this example we're talking about, we have a lot of different ways where we can actually find out when the background task is done processing image, and maybe update the thumbnails in my application. So maybe I have a placeholder thumbnail and say, hey, thumbnail processing. And then when the background task is done, creating a thumbnail for my picture, then the background task will raise that event on my actual application. I update the thumbnail with the image that was created by the background task. UWP app services. So you can actually build an app service extension. You can implement as a background task. You can deploy providers. This is something not a lot of people have done. So if there's anything here I really want to call out is that if you have no idea what I'm talking about, click all these links, right? This is something that I've only done once or twice. And I like to think I've been doing UWP for a long time. So it doesn't surprise me at all when I'm talking to people and they say, hey, I've never done app service before. We're actually right. We're right on time. I always run late on these. So 7 really focused areas, but none of them take up a massive part of the exam. Adaptive UI. So we talked about adaptive versus fluid or responsive UI, understanding the differences, picking the correct layout controls. Page navigation lifecycle events. So you got your navigation frame, being able to implement navigation between pages within that navigation frame, handling the back button, passing parameters between pages, understanding that. Page lifecycle events, so understanding the resume, understanding the suspension, resume, be able to take in, save parameters on suspension, reload them on resume. Data access, data binding. So you 2 different ways to implement data binding in the UI. Data access using Entity Framework Core. Ooh, nice long list to go through, right? Feature detection for adaptive coding. So not just using a feature, but determine if a feature is there. Determine if you have access to that feature. User input, customer input interactions. So understanding those input controls. What's the difference between a mouse event, a touch event? Being able to implement manual touch events and not just rely on touch to emulate the mouse. Implementing inking. Lots of UI interactivity here. Authentication and identity management. So be able to use OAuth within Azure Active Directory to authenticate into your application. Identity management using a credential locker. And then the last one we talked about, background tasks, notification, tile updates, running those background tasks and eventing between the background tasks, communicating between your application, background tasks, back and forward. So lots of study tools here. We have our study groups available on Born to Learn, that mslearn.net. I'm going to keep this up so everybody can take pictures if you like. Again, this slide will be up next week, but you know, some people like to take pictures. We have Microsoft Virtual Academy. So a lot of these topics are covered at Microsoft Virtual Academy. Microsoft Virtual Academy is really your website to go to when you want to see video series about a topic. Measure Up. Measure Up is the official practice test provider for Microsoft certification. So if you want to take a practice exam, remember our Measure Up area, 2 rooms over, is open till 1:45. edX.org. That's our massively open online courses. So these are online courses, 100% free, that allows you to go in and actually take like a traditional class. We have classes on Universal Windows Platform that covers a lot of these topics. Channel 9 is where you want to go if you want to see really cool samples, demos. People are doing a lot of these features. So if there's a feature like, let's say, okay, Credential Locker is interested in me. I want to see somebody actually use it. You go to Channel 9, look for a video of somebody using it. It's not necessarily a course as much as they're just cool videos people post. I like to call it the YouTube of technology, right? And then Universal Windows Platform has a whole GitHub repository with nothing but samples. And many of these features I talked to you about are actually included in the samples repository. So if you actually want to download some code, play around with it, and just look at how the product team will implement it, you can do that. All right. Thank you all so much. We're here till 1:45 today, so if you want to take a practice test, you can. We have 50% off certification exams on site. If you think, hey, I want to take the certification exam, I'm not ready to take it on site, that's perfectly normal. Our wonderful, wonderful MCT ambassadors are right at the front door. They have a SMS code you can get, and you send a SMS message to this code, and what it'll do is it give you a 40% off voucher for any certification exam before October 31st, and 30% off any practice test before October 31st. So that's a way to go if you don't think you're going to do anything while you're here at Ignite. Thank y'all so much.